In the chaotic streets of Lagos, where millions fight to be seen, one woman lived her life in silence, unnoticed, overlooked, and invisible to the world. But what she never knew was that in the shadows, a man with unimaginable power had been watching her all along, not out of pity, not by accident, but with a purpose so deep it would change her destiny forever. This is not just a love story. It is a tale of secrets, betrayal, and a kind of passion that refuses to stay hidden. She thought she was invisible, until a billionaire proved otherwise. In Lagos, the night never truly sleeps. Afrobeat pours from open-air bars in Lekki, Yaung Phase 1. The hum of traffic never dies, and neon lights bounce off tinted car windows as if the city itself is a stage. People laugh loudly, drinks spill over plastic tables, and the music pulses like a heartbeat. But in the middle of this chaos, a woman walks quietly, her presence so soft it barely stirs the air. Her name is Adesewa Adegbite, and for most of her life, she has been invisible. She moves through the crowd with a kind of grace that isn't loud enough to draw eyes, yet isn't clumsy enough to demand attention. Her clothes are simple, a cream blouse and a well-fitted skirt. Nothing about her screams wealth. Nothing announces status. She doesn't own a designer bag, nor does she wear the gold-plated watches the women around her flaunt. She blends almost too well. Yet, tonight feels different. The moment she steps off the bus at Ozumba Mbadiwe, weaving her way through the crowd of club-goers and hawkers, she feels it, that subtle prickle at the back of her neck. Someone is watching her. She turns once, twice, scanning faces under the colorful floodlights. A group of men laugh loudly, bottles raised. A couple leans against a car, whispering. A hawker calls out, selling grilled suya. But no one's gaze seems fixed on her. Still, the feeling lingers, like a shadow refusing to let go. By day, Adesewa is an architect, though few know her name. Her designs are unlike anything Lagos has seen, structures that merge ancient Yoruba patterns with sleek, futuristic lines. Her dream is bold, to reinvent Nigeria's skyline with buildings that carry history forward. Yet, despite her brilliance, she is ignored in meetings, passed over for contracts, dismissed by wealthy clients who prefer names that already echo in magazines. Even her family treats her as if her achievements are dust. Her mother, especially, never misses a chance to remind her, Adesewa, people don't even notice you. You need to marry well. A woman who isn't seen cannot survive in this Lagos. Those words cut deeper than she admits. Sometimes, in the stillness of her small apartment in Surulere, she opens her journal and writes the same haunting phrase, I am invisible. The pages hold her thoughts, her sketches, her longing to be recognized, not for wealth, not for beauty, but for her mind. Yet the world doesn't pause for invisible people. Lagos, restless and hungry, moves forward without her. Tonight, she finds herself wandering the busy strip near Lekki, searching for inspiration. The nightlife stirs ideas for her designs, lights reflecting off glass, music vibrating through concrete, people filling every space like water. She notices details others overlook, the symmetry of a high-rise against the sky, the geometry of bridges lit by car headlights, the rhythm of a crowd crossing the street. But always, that feeling remains. Someone is near, watching. The suspicion grows stronger when she enters a high-end gallery later that night, an invitation she received through a casual acquaintance. The gallery is a world away from the streets outside. White walls, polished floors, waiters in black uniforms carrying champagne glasses. The elite of Lagos society gather here, dressed in European brands, their laughter loud enough to echo against the marble. Adesewa walks in with quiet steps, clutching the strap of her modest bag. Nobody turns. Nobody notices. She hovers by the entrance for a moment, unsure if she belongs. Conversations swirl around her, but no one includes her. She moves slowly from one artwork to another, pretending to study them deeply, though her heart is elsewhere. She is used to this, the invisibility that hangs on her like a second skin. But then it happens again. That unmistakable prickle, eyes somewhere fixed on her. She freezes for a moment, pretending to sip her drink while scanning the room. Men in tailored suits discuss oil deals. Women compare diamond necklaces. The curator gestures at a painting of a sprawling savanna. Nobody looks her way. Yet the feeling is undeniable. She is being watched. Her chest tightens. A small flicker of hope stirs inside her. Could it be admiration? Could someone finally see me? But no, she tells herself bitterly. Who would notice her in this place? She takes a step toward the exit, her spirit weighed down, her invisibility confirmed once again. And yet, unseen in the corner of the gallery, shielded by distance and shadows, someone is watching. Not by chance, not by accident, but with intent. His gaze follows her every step, quietly, deliberately. Adesewa does not know it yet, but her life has just been caught in the invisible net of a billionaire who has been watching her far longer than tonight. Victoria Island glittered at night like a kingdom of glass and steel, but behind one of its tallest towers, the real power sat in silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Atlantic, waves shimmering under moonlight. Yet Ayoola Adegbite's eyes were not on the ocean. They were on a screen. The billionaire leaned forward in his leather chair, replaying the footage once more. Not of his boardroom, not of his competitors, not even of his billion naira servers humming in the basement below. No, his screen showed a crowded Lagos street, captured by one of his company's experimental AI lenses, and in the middle of that, chaos moving with quiet determination, was her, Adesewa. Ayoola was not the kind of man Lagos gossips wrote about. Other billionaires flooded Instagram with their yachts, their champagne-fueled parties, their endless travels. He was different. He preferred the shadows. The world knew his name only through headlines. The genius behind Adegbite Technologies, Nigeria's youngest billionaire CEO, the silent king of AI surveillance. But no one truly knew him. No paparazzi caught his face at clubs. No cameras found him in private jets. Even when he appeared at tech summits, he spoke little, letting others speculate about his life. Anonymity was his weapon. Yet, for all his distance from the spotlight, Ayoola's empire watched everyone else. His company had revolutionized smart surveillance across Africa, AI-powered cameras that could predict crimes before they happened, systems that tracked consumer habits for corporations, tools governments quietly deployed in airports and streets. His genius was not just in coding, but in understanding human behavior. He knew what people did when they believed no one was watching, and that was how he first saw her. It was a sweltering afternoon, the kind Lagos specializes in, when tempers flare and horns blare in endless traffic. Through one of his pilot street cameras in Yaba, he had seen a scene unfold. A wealthy man in a flashy SUV berating a poor street vendor whose tray of oranges had toppled. People walked past, pretending not to notice. The vendor trembled, humiliated, and then she appeared. Adesewa. She stepped forward, not aggressively, but firmly, placing herself between the vendor and the angry driver. She spoke words that the camera did not record, but her stance was unmistakable. Her hands spread in defense, her eyes unyielding. The man eventually drove away, leaving insults behind. Adesewa picked up the scattered oranges, helped the vendor arrange them, and then disappeared into the crowd as if nothing had happened. Ayoola had been transfixed, not because she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, though she carried a quiet beauty, but because she was unafraid to stand where others pretended not to see. That night, he searched for her again. And then again, the next. It wasn't difficult. His systems were everywhere. He began to notice her patterns. The way she left home early, always with a sketchpad tucked under her arm. The way she sometimes stopped to help strangers carry loads, or gave her seat up in crowded buses. The way she avoided flashy places, yet paused to admire buildings others ignored. Resilience, humility, defiance. She refused to bend for the Lagos elite, and with every detail, Ayoola's fascination grew. But fascination was dangerous for a man like him. He knew too well what wealth invited: manipulation, betrayal, false love. The scars of his past taught him that trust was a luxury he could never afford. Women who claimed to care for him always wanted his name, his empire, his status. Friends who once shared dreams with him had sold his secrets for profit. His billions, instead of freeing him, had trapped him in a glass cage. So he chose the safer path. He watched, and yet watching was not enough. His inner monologues turned restless. Am I crossing a line, he asked himself, as he stared at the flickering footage late into the night. Am I studying her like one of my experiments, or am I simply afraid to feel again? But no matter how he argued with himself, the truth pulsed through his veins. She had awakened something he thought long dead. Still, Ayoola could not just walk up to her. That would shatter everything. The invisible world he had built around her would collapse. She might run, or worse, she might see him as every other man saw him, a wallet, not a soul. Instead, he devised a plan, a way to bring her into his orbit without revealing his secret. He would create an opportunity she could not refuse, an architectural project so grand it would elevate her career. And yet, it would place her right in the heart of his world. She would believe it was chance. She would never know he had orchestrated it. And perhaps, if fate was kind, she might finally see him. Not the billionaire, not the empire, but the man hidden beneath it all. Ayoola leaned back in his chair, the city lights reflecting in his sharp eyes. On the screen, Adesewa moved again, brushing a strand of hair from her face as she walked through the market. Ordinary, unnoticed, invisible to everyone but him. He whispered to the empty room, almost like a vow, "Your life is about to change, Adesewa. Forever." The morning began like any other. The blare of Lagos traffic seeped through Adesewa's thin apartment walls, horns clashing like impatient symphonies. She sat by her small desk, sketching lines of a futuristic building that looked more like a dream than something Lagos society would ever allow her to build. The sketchpad was her escape, her quiet rebellion against a world that dismissed her. Then her laptop chimed. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was another rejection email from one of the firms she had submitted proposals to. But curiosity tugged. She opened the inbox and froze. There was no sender's name, no company logo, just a subject line. "An invitation awaits." She clicked. Inside, a single paragraph. "We have reviewed your portfolio. Your designs hold the future of Lagos in their lines. You are invited to pitch for a confidential project, Banana Island Smart Home Estates. Your presentation is expected this Friday at 10 a.m. Further details will follow. No signatures, no numbers, no attachments." Adesewa blinked, her breath caught between disbelief and suspicion. Banana Island? The sanctuary of billionaires? It was the most elite address in Nigeria, a world so far removed from her cramped one-bedroom flat that the idea alone seemed laughable. She reread the email 5 times, then leaned back, her heart racing. It must be a scam, she thought. But then, how would a scammer know her work so intimately? The phrasing suggested familiarity. They had seen her portfolio, her sketches, her vision. The safe thing to do would be to delete it, pretend it never arrived. But something in her spirit whispered, "This is your door." Walk through it. Friday came too quickly. She wore her best outfit, a tailored navy gown she had saved for weddings and important events. Not flashy, but elegant. Her hands trembled as she held her sketch portfolio, the leather edges worn from years of rejection. The ride to Banana Island felt like traveling to another world. Her cab slowed at the heavily guarded gates. Security towers loomed, cameras watched from angles, and armed guards with sleek uniforms checked every passing vehicle. The cab driver glanced at her suspiciously. "Madam, are you sure you belong here?" Her throat went dry, but she nodded anyway. At the checkpoint, a guard scanned her ID and checked against an iPad. To her shock, her name was listed. The gate opened. As they drove in, she pressed her face against the window, awestruck. Mansions lined the streets, each more futuristic than the last. Glass fortresses with infinity pools, hanging gardens spilling green over balconies, driveways gleaming with Rolls-Royces and Bentleys. Even the air felt different, as though the breeze had been filtered through money itself. Finally, the cab stopped in front of a sprawling mansion unlike anything she'd ever seen. It rose like a palace from another era, yet pulsed with modern technology, solar panels glimmering on the roof, motion sensor lights embedded into the stone driveway. Inside, she was ushered into a boardroom with walls of glass that looked out over the Atlantic. A long table stretched across the room. Executives sat scattered along it, dressed in sharp suits, their eyes cool and detached. Adesewa's knees wobbled, but when she began to speak, her voice found strength. She unfolded her designs with trembling hands. She spoke of a Lagos that remembered its past while building its future, of houses that whispered Yoruba proverbs in their design, of windows shaped like traditional motifs but crafted with futuristic glass, of gardens that echoed ancient courtyards, yet powered themselves with AI irrigation. Her words spilled not like a practiced speech, but like a confession. She did not flatter them, did not grovel. She spoke as if Lagos itself were in the room, demanding to be reborn. The boardroom remained silent, faces unreadable, but somewhere in the far corner of the room a pair of eyes lingered, eyes that did not belong to any of the listed executives. Ayoola Adegbite sat quietly in the shadows, saying nothing, revealing nothing. To her, he was just another silent figure, another faceless man in a suit. But to him, she was everything he had hoped for, unpolished, fearless, raw. When she finished, her voice cracked slightly with exhaustion. Silence stretched. Then, the man at the head of the table finally spoke. "The contract is yours." Her breath caught. She blinked, unsure she had heard right. The boardroom did not applaud, did not congratulate. They simply rose, collected their files, and walked out as though they had just chosen a paint color, nothing more. Confused but relieved, Adesewa clutched her portfolio and walked out. Her steps echoed in the marble hallway. She had won, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't pitched to a boardroom at all, but to someone else entirely. That night, lying awake in her apartment, the ceiling fan creaking above her, Adesewa couldn't rest. Something about the invitation, the silent approval, the eerie boardroom, it all felt too orchestrated, too deliberate. Who sent that email? Why me? Her eyes closed slowly, but the questions pulsed in her chest like a restless drum. She did not know that the mansion she had just secured the contract to design belonged to the very man who had been watching her all along. Her journey into Ayoola's world had begun, though she still thought it was only business. The gates opened like the entrance to another universe. Adesewa stood at the foot of Ayoola's mansion, portfolio clutched to her chest, her heart hammering. From outside, the estate had been intimidating, stretching across acres of Banana Island's prime land. But stepping in was something else entirely. This was not just a house. It was an empire built of glass, steel, and secrets. A driveway paved with marble tiles led into a vast open atrium. Above her, a glass ceiling soared, programmed to shift its tint with the sun's position. To her left, a glass elevator ascended soundlessly between floors, carrying silent figures she could barely glimpse. The air itself felt engineered, cool, perfumed faintly with something floral, yet mechanical in its perfection. The kitchen was a marvel. No human hands needed. AI-controlled counters prepared meals. Robotic arms adjusted spice levels. Refrigerators whispered inventory levels aloud. The walls responded to voice commands, shifting from opaque privacy to transparent clarity at a word. A rooftop garden hung above, lush with herbs and flowers, nourished by hydroponic systems hidden within sleek planters. Everywhere she turned, the mansion pulsed with intelligence. Motion sensors adjusted the lighting with her steps. Hidden speakers hummed soft music, as though the house itself were alive, curating an atmosphere around her. Yet beneath her awe, something gnawed at her. I don't belong here. Imposter syndrome clung to her like a second skin. She was a girl from Surulere who still took Danfo buses when her finances ran low, who ate roasted corn at roadside stalls, who sometimes counted coins for transport. And yet, here she stood in a billionaire's fortress, expected to shape its future. But work had always been her anchor. And so, she began. Adesewa walked the length of corridors, sketching modifications in her pad. She envisioned how to soften the cold technology with cultural warmth. Yoruba-inspired patterns etched subtly into glass panels, light fixtures shaped like traditional lamps, courtyards that echoed ancient compounds but infused with greenery sustained by AI. Her ideas poured out, fearless now. The mansion's vastness did not silence her. It inspired her. It was during one of these sessions that Ayoola first appeared. Not with the grand entrance of a billionaire, but casually, almost silently. She turned and found him standing at the far end of the hall, hands in his pockets, observing her like one might observe a painting. "I see you've already begun rewriting the house," he said, voice calm, measured. She straightened, unsure how to address him. Was he her client? Her employer? A stranger? Yes. I thought the house needed soul." His lips curved faintly. Soul is rare in design. Rare in people, too. Their exchanges began like this, casual, brief, but charged with something beneath the words. Over the following days, he appeared more often, sometimes leaning against the doorframe as she explained her sketches to contractors, sometimes offering tea during late evenings in the study. Their conversations grew, light debates about technology and tradition, witty observations about Lagos traffic, questions that surprised her. But soon she noticed something odd. His questions sometimes slipped beyond the professional. "What inspires you when the world ignores you?" he asked once, too directly. "How do you handle being underestimated?" Another time. Adesewa frowned, unsettled. How could he know those were her wounds? How could he touch so precisely the questions she buried in her journals? She brushed it aside, convincing herself it was coincidence, but the unease lingered. Outside the mansion, life began to shift. Her friends called constantly, their voices dripping with envy. "Banana Island? You? Ah, Adesewa, don't forget us, oh!" They laughed, but beneath the laughter was sharpness. Her family, especially her mother, was relentless. "This is your chance, Sewa. Don't lose him. Don't be foolish. A man like that doesn't come twice." But Adesewa resisted the notion. To her, this was work, not romance. At least, that was what she told herself. Because quietly, something else had begun to bloom. Every time his eyes lingered on her sketches, every time he listened more intently than anyone ever had, every time his deep laugh escaped at her rare jokes, something shifted inside her. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. And yet, she couldn't shake the unease. One evening, Ayoola surprised her with an invitation. A private dinner, just the two of them. The dining room was set with understated elegance, candlelight flickering against glass walls. The city skyline stretched out in glittering diamonds beyond. A pianist played softly from another room. Adesewa, nervous, tried to focus on the food, dishes she could barely pronounce, flavors that overwhelmed her tongue. But Ayoola's gaze was steady, pulling her into conversation after conversation. They spoke of Lagos, of power, of ambition, of loneliness. He asked questions no one else had ever cared to ask. And then, midway through a glass of wine, it happened. He said her name in a way that froze her, not just Adesewa, but with the softness of someone who had said it many times before. His next words nearly slipped. "I've watched." He caught himself, coughing lightly, changing the sentence. But Adesewa's eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. She stared at him across the candlelit table, a flicker of suspicion rising. How did this billionaire know her so well? In a house built almost entirely of glass, Adesewa began to notice the cracks. At first, they were small, so subtle she thought her mind was playing tricks. But once suspicion crept in, it refused to leave. It began with the food. One evening, she walked into the AI kitchen and found a plate waiting. Jollof rice, fried plantain, and grilled chicken, spiced exactly the way her late father used to make it. She had never told Ayoola about her father's recipe, never mentioned the combination. She froze, staring at the plate, wondering if it was coincidence. But Ayoola appeared, smiling faintly. "You look like you needed comfort food," he said. Another day she mentioned in passing how exhausting Lagos traffic was. The next morning, his driver arrived with a route planned that avoided her usual stress points. Again, she hadn't told him where she usually passed, but he seemed to know. Then came the real shiver. Over dinner, Ayoola casually asked, "Do you still keep journals?" The question struck her like a slap. She had never mentioned her journals. Not to him, not to anyone outside her tiny circle of trust. Her heart raced, but she forced a smile, brushing it off. Still, unease burrowed deep. She confided in her closest friend, Kahinda, over a video call. "It's strange, Kenny. He knows things. Things I never told him. My favorite meals, my routines, even memories." Kahinda leaned closer to the camera, whispering urgently, "Sewa, be careful. Men like that, with money, with power, they don't play normal games. They study people. Don't lose yourself in this shine." Adesewa wanted to defend Ayoola, but her voice faltered. Because Kahinde was right. Something was off. Days later, her doubts became reality. She had been exploring the mansion for design inspiration, tracing corridors she hadn't yet examined. Most rooms opened automatically with AI recognition, but one heavy steel door caught her attention. It was locked. Curiosity prickled. She tried again, pressing her palm against the panel. To her surprise, the door slid open. Inside, the room hummed with quiet electricity. Rows of screens glowed in the dim light, casting eerie reflections on her face. She stepped forward, her breath shallow. Then she froze. On one of the screens, she saw herself, walking across a Jota bus stop months ago, sketchpad in hand. Another screen showed her leaving her apartment at dawn. Another, standing in line at a local buka, buying a mala. Another, seated in her church's back row, head bowed. Her blood ran cold. It was her, everywhere. Different days, different months, different parts of Lagos. Footage stitched together from places she had never thought anyone was watching. Her knees weakened as a flood of memories crashed in. Moments when she had felt that phantom gaze, the chill of unseen eyes. She had brushed it off, told herself it was imagination. But here was proof, glowing before her in cold, digital light. Her chest heaved, panic choking her throat. "Oh my God," she whispered. The sound of footsteps behind her made her spin. Ayoola stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "Adesewa," he said quietly. Her voice shook with fury. "What is this?" She gestured wildly at the screens. "You've been watching me all this time?" He didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. His calm unsettled her even more. "Yes," he said simply. "I've been watching." Her heart broke at the word. "Why? Am I some experiment to you? Some project? Do you get pleasure out of spying on me?" Ayula's eyes softened, though his voice remained steady. "Not spying. Seeing. You think the world doesn't notice you, Adesewa. But I noticed. I saw what no one else cared to see. The way you stand up for others. The way you fight quietly for dignity. The brilliance in your designs. I couldn't look away." Her tears burned hot. "You had no right." "I know." He stepped closer, almost pleading. "But I had no other way. My life, this world, I don't trust it. People come to me for what I have, never for who I am. You were different. I needed to be sure before I stepped into your world." His words carried sincerity, but they only twisted the knife deeper. Shock, betrayal, and a strange fascination warred inside her. Part of her wanted to believe him. Part of her wanted to scream. "You could have just spoken to me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was afraid," he admitted. The admission did not soothe her. Instead, it ignited rage. She turned sharply, clutching her bag, storming past him. "Adesewa!" he called after her, his tone raw. But she didn't stop. She walked through the mansion's cold corridors, her footsteps echoing like thunder in the silence, until she reached the gate. The night air of Lagos hit her face, humid and heavy. She stepped into it like a woman escaping a cage, tears blurring the city lights. Ayoola remained in the control room, alone, screens flickering around him. For the first time in years, the man who watched everything realized he might lose the only person who had ever made him want to be seen. Ayoola stood in silence, torn between the safety of his shadows and the risk of stepping fully into her light. His next move would decide everything. Betrayal, Adesewa realized, had its own taste, bitter, sharp, lingering, and when mixed with the confusing pull of desire, it burned even deeper. She spent the following days in isolation. Her once quiet apartment in Surulere now felt like both a sanctuary and a prison. Curtains drawn, she sat hunched over her journal, the pages absorbing her torment. Her pen scratched furiously across paper. Was I loved, or was I studied? Am I a woman to him, or just another file in his empire of data? Outside her window, Lagos life carried on with its noisy resilience, hawkers calling out, generators rumbling, buses blaring horns. But inside, time seemed to stand still, suffocating her in silence. The outside world, however, refused to stay quiet about her. Within days, social media had erupted. Blogs carried her name, though most didn't know her face. Headlines speculated, mystery woman seen with billionaire Ayoola Adegbite. Is this the architect behind the mogul's latest obsession? Her phone buzzed constantly, with links from friends, whispers clothed in false concern. Her mother, of course, wasted no time. Sewa, do not throw this chance away, she scolded over the phone. A man like that, wealth, power, influence, you endure anything for security. Do you want to die in obscurity, like your father did? This is your escape. Endure, my daughter. Endure. Adesewa listened, her jaw clenched, her heart sinking deeper. Endure. Was that what love was supposed to be? Enduring surveillance, lies, and manipulation. Even her closest friends split along fault lines. Kehinde whispered betrayal in her ear, urging her to leave. Others, dazzled by the thought of wealth, urged her to forgive. You're lucky, Seth, one laughed on a call. At least somebody noticed you. Invisible, Kay, not anymore. But to Adesewa, that was the deepest irony. For so long, she had longed to be seen, and now that she was, she wished she could vanish again. At night, in the suffocating darkness of a PHCN blackout, she let herself break. Sitting on the floor of her small bedroom, sweat clinging to her skin, she cried until her throat burned. She whispered to herself in trembling sobs, maybe I was never a woman to him. Maybe I was just an experiment. Meanwhile, Ayoola tried everything he thought might heal the rift. Lavish gifts arrived at her door. Bouquets of roses that filled the tiny room with suffocating fragrance, luxury handbags she didn't know how to carry, jewelry that sparkled but weighed heavy on her wrist. She returned them all. His calls flooded her phone, his voice ranging from calm apologies to desperate pleas. She ignored most of them, sometimes answering only to hang up the moment she heard his breath. But Ayoola was not a man who surrendered easily. One evening, as she returned from buying roasted corn on her street, she froze. His sleek blacks car was parked outside her building. And there he was, Ayoola himself, standing tall against the humid dusk, his suit out of place among the cracked cement walls and shouting neighbors. Her heart lurched. You shouldn't be here. I had to be, he said, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying sleeplessness. Adesewa, you don't understand. I never wanted to hurt you. She pushed past him toward the stairs, but he followed, relentless. Do you know what betrayal feels like, Sewa? Do you know what it's like to be used by everyone you trust? She turned sharply, anger flaring. Do you know what it feels like to be studied instead of loved? Silence hung heavy between them. The noisy street around them seemed to fade, leaving only the weight of their words. He broke it first, his voice raw. I watched you because you were real, because everyone else I've let close has betrayed me. Friends sold my company shares to rivals. Women smiled at me but loved only my money. I couldn't risk it again. Not with you. I needed to know you were true before I gave you my heart. Her chest ached, torn between fury and sympathy. His vulnerability pierced her defenses, but the wound of his deception still throbbed. You can't build love on surveillance, Ayoola. You build it on trust. Their argument dwindled into a moment of fragile silence. Standing in the narrow stairwell, the billionaire and the invisible woman stared at each other, stripped bare of pretense. For the first time, she saw not a mogul, not a man of shadows, but someone broken, afraid to be used, desperate to be loved. For a heartbeat, she almost softened. Almost. But wounds take longer to heal than a single conversation. She stepped back, her voice firm, though her eyes glistened. "I need time." Ayoola's shoulders sank, defeat flickering across his features. "I'll wait," he said quietly. She climbed the stairs, leaving him in the dim glow of the streetlight, his presence out of place in her world. And though his car eventually pulled away, the echo of his words lingered in her chest, gnawing at her resolve. Yet just as cracks sometimes widen into collapse, so too does fate conspire to test what is fragile. For beyond her heartbreak and his regret, another presence was moving quietly into their story. One with dangerous intentions, and no patience for love's hesitation. Neither Adesewa nor Ayoola realized that a rival had just stepped into the game, ready to tear apart whatever fragile bond remained. In the game of love and wealth, rivals don't walk in. They arrive with sharp claws and polished smiles. Ayoola Adegbite mastered both. She had built her reputation in Lagos the hard way, boardroom by boardroom, rumor by rumor, until people learned that the quiet woman in a white silk blouse could unmake fortunes with a single whispered sentence. Where others flaunted noise, Ayoola wielded silence. Where others posted, she positioned, and she had once positioned herself beside Ayoola Adegbite, not merely as a lover, but as a strategist, a mirror, a shadow that stood just behind his throne. To Ayoola, Ayoola was not just an ex-partner. He was unfinished business. She had helped assemble parts of his empire's early roadmap, cut deals while he kept his distance from the spotlight, turned hostile rooms into signing ceremonies with her precise charm. She believed that kind of history meant ownership, a claim paperless yet powerful. So when whispers floated through Victoria Island that a woman from nowhere was now orbiting Ayoola's life, Ayoola smiled without warmth. "An invisible girl," she said to a confidant, voice like ice in a glass. "Let's see how far invisibility gets in daylight." The first shot was soft, an anonymous opinion piece on a well-read blog. Is Nigeria's most private billionaire being played? The article didn't say Adesewa's full name, but it didn't need to. It described a new companion with unclear credentials, hinted at ambition masked as modesty, and framed questions as facts. Who was funding her? Why the sudden rise? Within hours, aggregator pages recycled the piece into shriller headlines. Comments slithered in, some cruel, some mocking, many eager to believe that a woman near power must have climbed there by deception. By the next afternoon, Adesewa's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Strangers dissected her outfits, her neighborhood, her face, as though the sum of a woman could be tallied in pixels. Old acquaintances resurfaced, feigning concern while chasing clout. "We used to take the same Danfo. Look at her now." The Lagos elite, who once hadn't seen her at all, now saw too much. And at cocktail parties on rooftops, where the ocean threw salt into the air, they let their laughter carry. Ayoola's charity project, someone snickered into a champagne flute. He'll remember what class looks like soon. Adesewa felt the mockery like heat against her cheeks. The woman who once faded into crowds could no longer hide. Visibility had arrived cruelly, without tenderness or choice. She had expected skepticism, not humiliation. She wore calm like armor, but in the quiet of her apartment, the comments burned through the metal. Was this what it meant to be seen? Exposure without safety. Attention without respect. She wondered if the price of touching a world like Ayoola's was to be constantly measured on scales she never agreed to step on. Ayoola waited a full week before stepping out of the shadows. She chose her moment with theatrical restraint, a design expo where architects and developers pressed hands and exchanged carefully curated compliments. She glided toward Adesewa when the cameras were politely distant, perfume gentle, smile flawless. "Your work," she said, eyes cool as a winter lagoon, "has certainly accelerated." No insult in the words, yet there it was, woven into the tone, doubt shaped like silk. "I admire velocity," Omowunmi continued, "but I prefer momentum built on foundations we can verify." "I prefer foundations built on truth," Adesewa replied, surprised at her own steadiness. The response drew a flicker, just a flicker, from Omowunmi's mask. The conversation slid into a duel. Omowunmi spoke of standards and circles. Adesewa answered with vision and neighborhoods that deserved grace, not pity. Their words were blades cushioned in velvet, and while onlookers remarked about elegance, the air between the women crackled with warning. When Omowunmi finally turned away, she left behind a scent of lilies and a colder room. Ayoola heard about the encounter within the hour. His reply arrived not via gossip, but on a stage. At a fintech architecture forum days later, he introduced a pilot initiative to fund culture-rooted smart estates, naming Adesewa as lead designer on the flagship. The statement was simple, public, unambiguous. It didn't scold the rumors or dignify the mockery. It wrote over them. Cameras flashed. Investors took notes. Tongues paused, if only to recalculate. But Ayoola's public refusal to distance himself from Adesewa only tightened the coil inside Omowunmi. Rage for her was never loud. It was methodical. She pivoted from romance to calculus, from hurt to strategy. If the story would not yield to emotion, it would bend to numbers. The rivalry became bigger than a triangle. It shifted into an acquisition battle staged in lounges and inboxes, on conference calls and private terraces. Quietly, Omowunmi began romancing Ayoola's perimeter, suppliers, minor shareholders, even a few restless executives who resented the recent centralization of decision-making. She knew where contracts aged into discontent, where old favors ached for renewal, where one delayed payment could harvest 5 new grievances. She whispered synergy to foreign funds hungry for a footprint in West African AI infrastructure, painting a future where Adegbite technologies, with the right governance, could scale faster, cleaner, safer. Governance was a velvet word. Inside, it had teeth. Adesewa watched the shift with a knot in her stomach. She had never asked to be a gladiator in these arenas, never trained to navigate rooms where smiles hid contracts. At night, she stood on her balcony, the hum of generators rising like a distant storm, and questioned the size of the wave forming against her calm. Was she strong enough to stand here, between a man raised by shadows and a woman fluent in knives you could not see? Her hands, so certain over blueprints, trembled over her phone. She typed a message to Ayoola, then erased it, choosing instead to breathe until the city slowed. The next morning, a rumor folded into her inbox like a black origami bird. If true, it would not merely bruise, it would rupture. Omowunmi, it said, had a move ready, one that would shake boardrooms, jolt markets, and reduce personal loyalties to quaint stories people used to tell before breakfast meetings. It wouldn't need scandal or spectacle, just precision. Omowunmi had placed her pieces. The board gleamed under cold light. One signature, just one, could ruin them both. When the world burns around love, only loyalty survives. The firestorm began with a single leak. A confidential set of documents, internal forecasts, private emails, sensitive memos, spilled across business blogs and financial feeds. At first, it was a spark, but in the hyper-connected Lagos economy, sparks always found fuel. Investors panicked, analysts speculated, competitors smirked, headlines blared. Adegbite Technologies facing internal instability? Within hours, Ayoola's empire, built on glass towers and invisible networks, trembled. Stock values dipped. Partners hesitated. Boardrooms whispered mutiny. Ayoola withdrew from the spotlight, though in truth, he had never liked it anyway. The man who once commanded boardrooms with silence now found his name dragged through the digital mud. Every time he opened his phone, another headline dissected him. Another critic declared his downfall inevitable. For a man who thrived on control, it was suffocating. And yet, in the chaos, Adesewa did the unthinkable. She stayed. She stood by him when journalists staked out his headquarters, when foreign investors pulled out, when his own executives began to whisper exit strategies. In the silence of his penthouse, where city lights reflected like judgment in the glass walls, Adesewa laid a hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "You are more than this storm, Ayoola. You are more than the numbers." Her words disarmed him more than any attack, so he took her away. The island lay off the Lagos coast, invisible on most maps. Purchased years ago, Ayoola had transformed it into a self-sustaining eco-retreat. Solar fields humming softly, rainwater systems feeding lush gardens, bamboo villas woven seamlessly into the landscape. No paparazzi, no networks, just sea, sky, and silence. For the first time in weeks, Ayoola exhaled. He and Adesewa walked barefoot on the sand, the Atlantic crashing gently against the shore. At night, campfires lit the beach. They sat side by side, watching sparks climb into the star-heavy sky. "I used to dream of disappearing here forever," Ayoola admitted, his voice low, eyes reflecting the firelight. "But even here, the world finds me." Adesewa studied him, her heart softening. Beneath his billions, beneath his fortress of glass and algorithms, there was a man, afraid not of poverty, but of irrelevance. "I don't fear losing money," he confessed, pressing his hands into the sand. "I fear losing meaning. What am I without this empire? Just another man. And I've spent too long believing no one would want just that man." Adesewa reached for his hand, her fingers weaving through his. "You are not your empire, Ayoola. You are not your fear. You are the man who noticed what no one else did, and that is more valuable than any stock price." The confession cracked something in him. For years, Ayoola had armored himself with silence, wealth, and distance. Now, sitting by the sea, with the only woman who had dared confront him, he allowed himself to be bare. Their days on the island became rituals of intimacy. Mornings began with fresh fruit gathered from the garden. Afternoons melted into long walks, where Adesewa shared childhood stories she had never told anyone. How she used to sketch on old cement bags because notebooks were too expensive. How her father once promised her she would redesign the sky. Evenings deepened with laughter, debates, stolen kisses beneath the stars. Passion ignited not as a sudden flame, but as embers that had smoldered for weeks. In the quiet of the bamboo villa, they became partners, not just in business or survival, but in a love that stripped them both of pretense. For Adesewa, it was the first time she felt truly visible. For Ayoola, it was the first time he felt truly human. But storms do not end because two people fall in love. Even on the island, Ayoola's mind never fully rested. By lantern light, he and Adesewa began sketching strategies. How to counter Omowunmi's moves, how to restructure leadership, how to turn vulnerability into strength. To her surprise, Ayoola leaned on her insight, not just her comfort. She was no longer the invisible architect. She was his partner, his co-strategist. Together, they mapped a comeback that would silence doubters and reclaim power. For a fleeting moment, hope returned. Until one morning, Adesewa woke to silence. The bamboo villa felt wrong. The sea roared louder, the garden seemed too still. She called his name, but no answer came. The bed beside her was empty, the fire pit cold. Panic surged as she searched the villa, then the beach, then the entire compound. His favorite watch lay on the table. His phone, switched off, sat untouched. No footprints in the sand, no sign of a boat leaving the dock. He was simply gone. Adesewa stood on the beach, the Atlantic stretching infinite before her, terror creeping into her chest. Just as they began to rebuild, Ayoola had vanished without a trace, leaving Adesewa to wonder if love itself had been another illusion. The absence of someone you love is louder than any noise. Adesewa knew this truth the moment she opened her eyes and found the space beside her empty. At first, it seemed ordinary. Ayoola often rose before dawn, pacing silently, letting his mind outrun the rest of the world. She expected to hear the soft hum of his steps, the rustle of papers, the clink of a teacup. But the villa was too still. The silence pressed against her like a weight. She slipped from the bed, her feet brushing the bamboo floor. "Ayoola," she called softly. No reply. She moved to the veranda. The Atlantic roared beyond the beach, waves battering the shore with indifference. But the dock was empty. The small boats moored there sat, untouched, rocking gently. No footprints, no sign of departure. Her heartbeat quickened. She searched the villa, bedroom, study, garden path, her breath growing ragged with each unanswered call. His phone lay on the desk, switched off. His watch, the one he never removed, sat abandoned beside it. A man who measured control in every detail would never leave those things behind. Panic bloomed like fire. She ran across the compound, calling his name into the sea wind, her voice breaking against the horizon. Nothing. Just gulls circling high, their cries mocking her desperation. By afternoon, she was trembling. She contacted his staff, her voice sharp with urgency. But every response was the same, a vague reassurance, polite yet hollow. "He is fine, madam. Do not worry. Mr. Adegbite handles things privately sometimes." Their words felt rehearsed, as if they had been instructed not to tell her the truth. It was abandonment, or danger. She didn't know which cut deeper. For days, she lived like a ghost in the mansion. Every corner whispered of him. The lounge where they had debated technology versus tradition. The rooftop garden where he once laughed at her description of Lagos traffic. The fire pit where he had spoken of his fear of powerlessness. Each place now haunted her with absence. At night, when sleep refused to come, she lay on the bed alone, clutching her journal. The words spilled from her pen in uneven strokes. Perhaps I was never seen. Perhaps I was only a distraction until he remembered his real life. Her greatest fear, the fear of invisibility, gnawed at her again. Maybe he had abandoned her like everyone else, slipping back into shadows where she could not follow. But the truth lay elsewhere. Ayoola had not left her out of cruelty or indifference. He was moving through the city in silence, unseen, dismantling the invisible web Omowunmi had cast over his empire. Her takeover plot was deeper than Adesewa knew. Contracts signed in foreign boardrooms, alliances stitched together across oceans. To protect Adesewa, Ayoola had chosen vanishing over confrontation. The less she knew, the safer she was. But safety meant nothing to her in his absence. Every day stretched into torment. She stopped eating, stopped sketching, her designs gathering dust on the table. Her reflection in the glass walls looked thinner, lonelier. "He saw me once," she whispered to herself. "Now he doesn't." Her mother called, urging patience, reminding her to hold her ground, no matter what. Friends sent curious messages, some sympathetic, others gossipy, all invasive. Adesewa stopped answering. What use were words when the only one she needed was gone? By the fifth night, she reached her breaking point. She sat on the veranda, in darkness, the sea stretching endless before her, waves glowing faintly under moonlight. She whispered into the wind, "Ayoola, if you ever truly saw me, come back." That was when the phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the night like a blade. She jumped, her chest tight. The villa phone rarely rang. She lifted the receiver with trembling hands. "Hello?" At first, only silence. Then a voice, low and distorted, seeped through. "If you want to see him again," the voice said slowly, each word deliberate, "you must come alone." Her breath caught, her knees nearly buckled. "Who is this? Where is he?" she demanded. But the line clicked dead. Adesewa clutched the receiver, her hands icy. Her world tilted, shadows crowding her vision. The man she loved was alive, but somewhere unreachable, hidden by forces she did not understand. and now she would have to step into the darkness alone to find him. Sometimes battles are fought, not in courtrooms, but in shadows. The instructions from the mysterious call had led Adesewa down winding Lagos backstreets, away from Banana Island's shimmering lights, away from the world of boardrooms and glossy headlines. The car that picked her up had tinted windows, its driver mute, its route unpredictable. She clutched her bag as the city blurred by, her mind a storm of questions. Fear mingled with a stubborn fire. Whatever lay at the end of this road, she had to see him. The safe house looked nothing like Ayoola's world of polished glass and marble. It was a discreet duplex in Ikeja, hidden behind high gates, its exterior ordinary, almost forgettable. The kind of house Lagos eyes would pass without pausing. But inside, security screens glowed softly, maps and documents cluttered the tables, and men in quiet suits hovered like shadows. And there he was. Ayoola sat hunched over a desk, sleeves rolled up, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He looked different, less the untouchable billionaire, more the weary man behind the mask. He wasn't wounded by violence, but by sleepless nights and relentless strategy sessions. Coffee cups littered the desk beside his abandoned laptop. Ayoola, her voice cracked. He lifted his head. For the first time in days, his hardened expression softened. Adesewa. She rushed forward, and for a moment, words dissolved. She touched his face, traced the fatigue lines etched by worry. He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. For all the wealth he commanded, in that moment, he looked like a man afraid of losing the only thing that mattered. When the silence broke, truth spilled. Omowunmi's plan was sharper than gossip had suggested. She wasn't only waging a personal vendetta, she was orchestrating a hostile takeover, aligning with foreign investors who saw Ayoola's empire as ripe for dismantling. The leaked documents were just the opening blow. The true battle was a quiet but merciless war of mergers and acquisitions. She's convincing them that I am unstable, reckless, distracted, Ayoola explained, his voice low but steady. If her plan works, my company won't belong to me anymore. And everything I've built, all the power to create change, to innovate, it'll become their machine. Adesewa sat in silence, her mind racing. She wasn't trained for corporate warfare, but her eyes were trained for detail, for design, for flaws others missed. She studied the stacks of papers, the projected charts, the structural outlines of Omowunmi's proposals. This plan, she murmured, pointing to a diagram of proposed facilities. It looks strong, but she's overlooked something. Ayoola frowned. What? The logistics of execution. Her design doesn't account for Lagos terrain realities. Flood zones, traffic choke points, unreliable power grids. If you highlight these flaws, you can prove her project isn't viable. For the first time in days, Ayoola's lips curved into a faint smile. You see angles I don't. You always did. From that moment, they fought together. Nights blurred into dawns as they spread documents across the floor, arguing, sketching, refining. She brought her architect's precision. He brought his strategist's reach. Their collaboration was fierce yet intimate, each challenge punctuated by stolen glances, lingering touches. A spilled cup of coffee became laughter. A shared silence became a kiss. Their bond, tested in betrayal, forged stronger in battle. "You're not just my muse," Ayoola whispered one night, as she lay beside him among scattered blueprints. "You're my partner." Adesewa felt something shift inside her. For so long, she had feared invisibility. But now, with him, in this hidden house of strategy and survival, she wasn't just visible, she was essential. She found herself speaking up more, challenging him, shaping the plan. And he listened, truly listened, not as a man tolerating a woman, but as an equal. Together, they crafted a daring counterplan. Instead of denying Omowunmi's strength, they would expose her weaknesses, turning her ambition against her. They drafted presentations, prepared data, and lined up quiet allies. Their move wasn't loud, but it was precise. Like architecture itself, the strength lay in hidden supports. The execution day loomed. The tension in the safe house thickened with every hour, the air vibrating with the weight of their gamble. One mistake could unravel everything: the empire, their fragile trust, their love. But as Ayoola looked across the table at Adesewa, her eyes blazing with determination, he knew he would risk it all. For her, for them, for the chance to reclaim not just his company, but the meaning of loyalty. The world outside sharpened its knives, waiting for their move. And as the clock ticked toward their boldest stand yet, Ayoola and Adesewa knew one misstep would destroy both their love and his empire forever. The world waited for the man who never spoke to finally roar. Ayoola Adegbite had spent years shrouded in silence, his empire built behind tinted glass and encrypted networks. Investors knew him as a genius strategist. Competitors knew him as a ghost who moved pieces on the board without ever appearing. Lagos society knew him as a rumor, a billionaire who refused to flaunt his wealth. But when the invitations hit inboxes across the city, shockwaves rippled. Ayoola Adegbite to hold global press event, Eco Hotel, Lagos. No one had ever seen him willingly stand before cameras. By evening, journalists swarmed, investors filled the grand ballroom, and socialites clutched their pearls, eager for spectacle. The chandeliers glittered, cameras clicked, and murmurs hummed as the double doors opened. Ayoola walked in, not alone, but with Adesewa beside him. The room stilled. She wore a gown the color of midnight, her natural hair swept into a crown. She did not glitter with jewels or designer excess, yet she carried herself with a grace that silenced even the sharpest whispers. Her hand rested firmly in Ayoola's. For weeks she had been mocked as a shadow, dismissed as a gold digger. Tonight she stood as his equal. Ayoola approached the podium, his gaze steady. He didn't clear his throat, didn't shuffle papers. His silence alone commanded the room. Then he spoke, his voice measured but resonant. For too long, I have allowed shadows to speak louder than truth. I have been silent while lies grew louder. Today, that ends. Gasps echoed. This was not the Ayoola Lagos thought it knew. He continued, each word cutting with surgical precision. He dismantled Omowunmi's narrative, exposing her leaked documents as distortions, her foreign merger as a plan that ignored Nigeria's realities. He unveiled projections of his company's sustainable future, projects rooted in African innovation, not foreign dependency. He revealed new partnerships, silent allies now stepping forward in support. And then, the room drew its sharpest breath as Ayoola turned to Adesewa. "This is Adesewa Adegbite," he declared. "She is not a shadow, not a rumor, not a whisper on blogs. She is my partner, in vision, in truth, in life." He stepped aside, motioning her forward. The moment stretched like an eternity. Adesewa's palms were damp, her knees weak, but something steadied her. The memory of years of invisibility. She was tired of silence. She took the podium. Cameras zoomed. Social media feeds exploded. She spoke, not with rehearsed polish, but with raw honesty. "I am not here because of his money," she began. "I am here because I believe in a Nigeria that builds its own future. A Nigeria where tradition inspires innovation, where architecture and technology reflect who we are, not just what the world wants us to be. I was once invisible, but vision is not invisible, and neither is love." Her voice, steady at first, grew stronger with each word. The room leaned in, captivated by her humility, her authenticity. By the time she stepped back, the murmurs had shifted. The whispers of gold digger dissolved, replaced by applause. Outside the ballroom, social media lit up. Hashtags flipped from mockery to admiration. Jack Adesewa speaks. Ayoola and Adesewa. Nigeria future. Comment threads that once ridiculed her now called her inspiring, bold, a woman of substance. For the first time, Adesewa wasn't invisible. She was undeniably seen. Across the hall, Omowunmi stood like a statue, her carefully built web unraveled in real time. Investors who had once entertained her now avoided her eyes. She excused herself quietly, retreating with grace. But rage smoldered beneath her calm. For the first time, she was the one pushed into the shadows. Ayula's empire steadied. Investors' confidence surged. Stock values began to climb. What had threatened to collapse days before now shimmered with new energy. But behind their victorious smiles, exhaustion clung to Ayoola and Adesewa like a shadow. Nights of sleepless planning, weeks of emotional storms, months of wounds and betrayals. They had survived, but not unscarred. That night, as the ballroom emptied and Lagos exhaled, Adesewa sat quietly by the window of their hotel suite, staring out at the city lights. Her reflection in the glass startled her. No longer the invisible woman, but a face now known across Lagos, perhaps across the world. She whispered to herself, "I used to dream of being seen. Now the whole world is watching. But at what cost?" Ayoola joined her, slipping his hand into hers. His victory felt hollow without her peace. He saw the question in her eyes, the conflict in her silence. For though they had defeated Omowunmi, one final test remained, the choice between Adesewa's newfound identity and the love that bound them together. In a city where millions go unseen, one woman finally shone. Months had passed since the chaos of boardroom wars and media storms, months since whispers had turned to applause. Lagos had moved on to new scandals, new headlines, new distractions. But for Adesewa Adegbite, life had shifted forever. Her architecture firm now stood proudly in Yaba, a sleek, glass-fronted building she had designed herself, rooted in the idea of visibility. It was modern, airy, filled with light. Clients walked in and spoke her name with respect, not dismissal. She didn't need Ayula's empire to build it. Though he had offered, she insisted on funding it with her own merit, winning contracts through grit and vision. The invisible girl was now at the center of her own creation. At home, love blossomed. She and Ayoola were engaged, their wedding plans stirring both society's curiosity and their family's joy. They envisioned a celebration unlike any Lagos had seen, a fusion of modern luxury with deep Yoruba tradition. Glass chandeliers hanging above talking drums, a feast of jollof and champagne, a white dress sewn with aso-oke embroidery carrying the weight of heritage and hope. Adesewa often narrated her journey in interviews, her voice carrying the humility of someone who had known silence. "I used to believe I was invisible," she told a young female journalist. "But invisibility was never the truth. I just hadn't found the eyes willing to see me." Her story reached further when she was nominated for an International Design Award in Johannesburg. The red carpet shimmered beneath her heels as she walked, photographers calling her name. But this time, she didn't shrink. She raised her chin, smiled softly, and let the world see her. Beside her, Ayoola walked with quiet pride, his hand steady at her waist. But it was not the applause of the world that anchored her. It was the memory of a night under stars. The proposal had not been staged for cameras or headlines. It happened quietly, on Ayoola's eco-island, beneath a sky so clear it felt like eternity was leaning close to listen. A campfire crackled, casting golden light on his face as he took her hand. "Adesewa," he said, voice trembling with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I have lived in shadows all my life, afraid of being used, afraid of being truly seen. But you," he paused, his eyes wet, "you didn't just see me. You forced me to step into the light. Will you walk with me forever?" She had laughed through her tears, whispering yes as the waves applauded against the shore. Her family, once dismissive, now carried her like a crown. Her mother's eyes gleamed with pride each time she introduced her to friends. "This is my daughter, the architect," she would say, as though the word itself was a medal. The same woman who once warned her to endure for wealth now marveled at the truth. Her daughter had not only gained love, but built her own empire of respect. And Lagos, oh Lagos, restless, critical, loud, celebrated their love openly. Billboards carried her face for design awards. Magazines wrote about her projects, not just her relationship. Their love was no longer whispered in corners. or mocked on blogs. It was celebrated in the open, a symbol of possibility in a city that often overlooked quiet brilliance. At the Johannesburg ceremony, as Adesewa walked the red carpet in a flowing gown, Ayoola leaned close, his voice for her alone. "You were never invisible, Sewa. You were just unseen by the wrong eyes." She turned to him, her heart swelling. "And you were always hiding behind shadows, until love found us both." The cameras flashed, but their kiss was not for the world. It was for themselves, sealing a timeless love story that had begun in silence and grown into radiance. As the night deepened, Adesewa reflected on the journey, the nights of crying and blackout darkness, the sting of betrayal, the suffocating fear of being nothing more than a shadow. And now, standing here with her own name shining on a stage of global recognition, her hand in the hand of a man who had finally learned to step into light, she knew the truth. To be seen was not about wealth, not about trending hashtags, not about rooms finally turning their heads. It was about love. To be seen, she whispered softly, as though reciting a prayer, is not to be rich, but to be truly loved. She was no longer invisible. If this story touched your heart, don't just stop here. Hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing your reflections and theories. And if you want more powerful billionaire love stories filled with twists and emotions, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter. Your support keeps these stories alive.